August 14th, 1944, Concordia, Kansas. The freight car doors groaned open, and Otto Voss gripped the iron railing with both hands, his right leg ending 6 inches below where it should have. He had prepared himself for cruelty, for mockery, for the vindictive pleasure of the victorious. Instead, the first words he heard were, in a clean Midwestern accent, "Need a hand down, fella?" An American corporal stood below with both palms open, almost casual, as if helping a neighbor off a porch. Voss stared at those hands like they were artifacts from another world. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as remarkable as we did researching it, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the untold chapters of history that textbooks left out. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether it's Berlin or Brooklyn. We love hearing from you. And if this story moves you, share it. Someone needs to know that even in humanity's darkest hour, light still found a way through. The Kansas heat struck Voss like a physical blow. After weeks in the damp cold of Atlantic carriers, the prairie air felt solid, thick with dust and the sweet smell of wheat stubble baking under merciless sun. Cicadas rattled invisibly in the trees beyond the track. Armed guards called out in tones more suited to hospital orderlies than soldiers. "Easy now, take it slow." Beyond the wooden fence waited a row of olive-drab trucks marked with wide white crosses. Medical orderlies moved with brisk efficiency, greeting each arriving prisoner with calm voices, waving them toward stretchers and benches. They called in English, "Next, mind your step, we'll get you settled." The Germans exchanged looks of pure disbelief. Why waste medicine on the enemy? Voss had expected to be herded, shouted at, reduced to a number. Instead, he found his name being written carefully on a clipboard by a medical lieutenant barely out of his 20s, whose only comment was, "Don't worry about rank. We just need to know how to help you." The translator repeated the sentence in halting German. Voss nodded, unable to answer. And in that moment, staring at the clipboard with his name spelled perfectly in careful American handwriting, he realized that everything he had been taught about his enemies was a lie. The numbers told a story that no propaganda minister could have spun into victory. By August 1944, more than 371,000 German prisoners of war were scattered across the United States, from Texas to Maine, Oregon to Florida. They had been transported across the Atlantic in the same ships that carried American troops to Europe, a reverse current of defeat flowing westward. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required humane treatment and medical care equal to that given to the captor's own forces. But the United States went further. The War Department saw in mercy not weakness, but proof of civilization itself. Every operation, from labor assignments to hospital wards, had to demonstrate the difference between conformity and cruelty. That principle became physical architecture. Inside camps like Concordia, the Army Medical Department built infirmaries with red crosses painted large enough for high-altitude recognition. Vented wards caught prairie wind. Sloped ramps allowed wheelchairs passage across gravel. Workshops adjoined the wards, their benches covered with fittings, castings, straps, sheets of waxed paper. No camera of Nazi propaganda had ever imagined an American installation like this, half clinic, half small town, entirely functional. By the time Voss arrived, Concordia held over 4,000 German prisoners. More than 800 of them carried wounds that would never fully heal. They loaded Voss into a truck already half filled with other injured prisoners. 10 cups of water sat ready on the benches. One man, an artillery officer missing both legs, whispered, "They are filming this to look merciful." Another, staring out the flap toward endless farmland, replied quietly, "Then they are very good actors." The convoy started forward, dust rising high behind them, curling into the glare. At the horizon, a small flag shifted lazily above a cluster of white barracks. The wooden guard towers looked oddly plain, like farm silos. As they passed the gate, a guard saluted not mockingly, but by habit. No one returned it. None knew if they were permitted. When the trucks halted and ramps dropped, hospital staff were already lined up, nurses in khaki skirts and medics rolling wheelchairs forward across compacted soil. A German prisoner murmured, "They prepare for cripples as if we were their own." Inside the first ward, sunlight filtered through bleached curtains, clean sheets, folded blankets. Even glasses of milk waited on each metal table. The smell was of iodine and soap, not fear. For men who had traveled from the ruins of Normandy to French stockades, and then across the Atlantic in converted cargo holds, such calm looked impossible, like stepping backward into a peace that belonged to another planet. Daily life at Concordia was rigid but not harsh. At dawn the bugle woke both guards and captives. Breakfast followed, powdered eggs, bread, coffee thick, The able-bodied went out under guard to local farms, replacing civilian labor lost to the war effort. Those deemed permanently disabled remained in camp and were assigned duties that matched what strength remained. One man with a missing arm sorted mail for the compound. Another, who had lost an eye, kept the camp library organized with methodical precision. Time passed in tasks, giving structure where ideology had failed. But the remarkable sight was the prosthetic workshop. To step inside was to enter an industrial hymn, to repair. Half the workers were Germans, half Americans, mechanics, carpenters, medics. Bandsaws hummed. Files hissed over wood. From scrap aircraft aluminum came knee joints. From discarded rubber tires, saws for artificial feet. Technicians measured each limb in inches and patience. They laughed when fittings squeaked, adjusted, started again. The irony struck every newcomer. The enemy who had bombed factories was now rebuilding mobility with the enemy's materials. The word rehabilitation acquired a spiritual weight none dared name. A black-haired American machinist named Earl Stevens oversaw the fittings. He had lost 3 fingers at Bastogne and compensated with quick, precise movements of the remaining 2. When he tapped a wrench on the table for emphasis, it sounded like a heartbeat. "You don't salute with a leg," he would say. "You walk on it, so let's make sure it walks proud." At first the prisoners laughed out of politeness. Then, gradually, they realized he meant it. He took pride in their progress, as if they were his own company. He corrected posture, coached them through pain, applauded each proper stride across the sawdust floor. Letters from prisoners written under censorship, but still intensely personal, described the cognitive dissonance. "We were told the American knows victory only through machines," one wrote, "but even their machines serve compassion." Another, "They do not despise the defeated. They teach him how to stand again." These were not political conversions, but confessions of confusion. Doctrine had long equated health with racial worth. Yet here, compassion ignored uniform and accent alike. The contradiction tore at foundations that had seemed immovable. Outside the wire, locals obeyed curiosity more than anger. Kansas farmers watched hundreds of former German soldiers harvest wheat beside their son's home on furlough. They noticed the amputees driving tractors, prosthetic arms gripping levers steady as any flesh. Some farmers invited them to supper. They could not pronounce the names, but hospitality required no translation. When rumors spread of prisoners receiving hospital treatment at taxpayer expense, newspapers answered bluntly, "America fights cruelty by refusing to imitate it." Meanwhile, within the same camp, American veterans recovering from their own wounds sometimes dropped by to deliver supplies or teach carpentry. They greeted the Germans without malice, occasionally with jokes traded through translators. The captured men studied these veterans as if they were evidence. How a society treated its damaged heroes. In Germany, the crippled had been hidden from parades, rendered invisible by policy. Here, wheelchairs rolled openly down Main Street on holidays, flags tied to handles. To see that acceptance unsettled years of conditioning more thoroughly than sermons ever could. Winter arrived suddenly. The smooth Kansas plains froze stiff, turning farm furrows into pale ribs under frost. Inside Camp Concordia, the morning bell sounded through white breath and the clatter of crutches on packed snow. Each step squeaked against cold wood. Work in the prosthetic shop continued anyway, metal warmed by stoves, rubber smelling faintly of oil and sweat. The men joked that the wind itself was a drill instructor, forcing balance practice with every gust. Voss had grown accustomed to the rhythm. Every week brought small victories, a new alignment brace, a corrected fit, the slow rediscovery of symmetry. When Voss managed 3 flawless steps unaided, Stevens clapped once, sharp as a rifle crack. "That's it, buddy. That's the sound of the war ending, right here." That night in the dim barracks lined with coal stoves, conversation shifted from home to paradox. One man asked, "Why give us back our legs if we were enemies?" Another replied, "Maybe they need good workers." A third said quietly, "Maybe they just can." None of them had vocabulary for grace without strategy. Small moments of reversal accumulated like snow. Guards off duty shared baseball games with mobile prisoners, cheering equally for catches. The camp doctor staged a Christmas concert that featured both German folk tunes and American hymns. When prosthetic limbs squeaked on stage during applause, the crowd only clapped louder. In February 1945, an inspection team arrived from the Army's office of the Surgeon General. Among them was Colonel Harris, a veteran surgeon who had served at Bataan and carried the permanent slump of fatigue in his shoulders. He made notes, spoke briefly to prisoners, then asked for volunteers to demonstrate gait improvements. Voss stepped forward beside 2 others. They crossed the room one after another, their wooden sockets clicking perfectly with each step. When finished, Harris looked up and said only, "Gentlemen, these men can return to life." He meant the phrase literally, but among the watching prisoners it landed as revelation. Later that afternoon, a small delegation of American war amputees arrived from a veterans' hospital in Denver. They gathered in the workshop, sleeves rolled, revealing scars, crutches decorated with unit insignia. The senior among them tossed a baseball into the air, catching it with a hook prosthesis. "You'll get this range in about 6 months, he joked. Laughter erupted, not forced, but genuine. Across national lines, the same humor applied. Loss was survivable. and laughter was its anthem. The visiting Americans moved between tables, chatting through translators. One stopped at Vucci's bench, admiring the precision of his carving. The veteran nodded at his leg and said, "Mine's Army issue, too. They keep them better than boots." Then he handed over a cigarette, struck a match on his prosthetic hand, and shared it. For a minute they smoked in perfect and wordless equality. The smoke curled upward, dissolving against the rafters, carrying with it the last vestiges of enmity. Over months, the transformation became more profound than medical. The Germans had been taught that strength meant domination, that defect was a hidden disease. Now they watched the victors parade their wounded with pride. They saw posters in town showing disabled veterans smiling beside factory machines under slogans of national recovery. The notion that dignity could survive damage rearranged their understanding of everything they had fought for. In his borrowed notebook, Voss wrote an entry that survives through translation. "Here I see that a man who cannot march still belongs to his country. Perhaps the strong nation is the one that refuses to discard the broken." He underlined the sentence twice, but compassion carried another consequence. Homesickness became sharper. If the enemy could rise again, what of the homeland they left behind? Reports from Germany, ration cuts, bombed hospitals, wounded neglected in cellars circulated by rumor. The contradiction tore at them. Freedom existed behind barbed wire, while despair waited beyond it. As spring thawed the camp, the air filled with mud and possibility. Each day, new prisoners were released to farming details, their prosthetic legs leaving crisp, parallel lines in freshly turned soil. Life inside the fence had begun to echo ordinary work. Some guards even forgot to lock tool sheds, and nothing disappeared. Trust had become a routine gesture. One morning, an elderly farmer from town approached the fence, carrying a basket of apples. He tossed them one by one through the wire, saying only, "For the men who build." The Germans caught them politely, uncertain whether to feel insulted or blessed. The sweetness shocked the tongue, just as mercy had shocked the soul. Summer found the prairie loud again, locusts grinding their steady music across the heat. The war in Europe had ended. Germany lay in ruins. Newspapers confirmed it in brief, cautious headlines. Inside Camp Concordia, prisoners read the clippings in silence, no cheers, no tears. Just a long, slow exhale of men remembering they were alive. The disabled soldiers who had learned to walk again found their skills suddenly relevant. Army trucks arrived daily from neighboring farms, requesting workers for harvest. Men with mechanical legs pitched hay. Others with metal grips hammered fence posts. They moved awkwardly, but they moved. Locals watched from fields and porches, astonished at how quickly routines swallowed fear. Sergeant Otto Voss became supervisor for one such crew. He rode into the countryside with 3 other one-legged prisoners and a guard who was more chauffeur than watchman. At one stop, an American farmer's wife brought out lemonade heavy with ice. Voss stared until she laughed. "Drink before it melts, mister," she said. He tasted sugar for the first time in months and had no words. Axe that minor the absence of hatred. Hospitality felt larger than any treaty. By September 1945, orders for repatriation arrived. One division of the War Department wanted the disabled returned first. Another argued they were too fragile for immediate shipping. In the end, the decision balanced on practicality. Space cleared on transport ships, and the men who had arrived broken were to depart repaired. Each received a small envelope stamped War Department medical discharge for POW patient, a new prosthetic leg or brace, and 2 packs of cigarettes marked compliments of American Red Cross. The final evening before departure turned quiet. Guards and prisoners gathered at the fence, trading whatever possessions they could spare: carved wooden birds, pocket knives, letters written but never mailed. Earl Stevens, the machinist, handed Voss a small wrench engraved with his initials. "For tightening loose bolts," he said. "Even good legs need maintenance." Voss gripped it like a medal. Next morning convoys formed again. Each truck paused at the gate long enough for an inspection and a last salute. No speeches, just sunlight catching the wire, boots clanking onto metal ramps, and engines starting like heartbeats, restarting the world. When the camp doctor approached to say farewell, Voss balanced perfectly on his new leg and replied simply in English, "I walk because of you." The doctor adjusted his cap, eyes squinting under glare. That was the idea. Back across the Atlantic, Germany smelled of dust and coal smoke. Cities looked unreadable, street signs missing, walls pocked with bullet craters. Aid officials met arriving prisoners with forms and silence. The prosthetic limbs gleamed almost indecently against the gray ruin. Children stared. Some pointed and whispered, "Amerikanisch Bein," American legs. The mockery stung at first, then faded into pride. To walk unaided in a country still crawling from rubble felt like prophecy. Within a year, Voss found work in a mechanical repair cooperative funded by Allied reconstruction dollars. The shop occupied a former depot, its windows still scarred by blackout paint. His American wrench hung from his belt, heavy, nickel-bright, stamped with a maker's mark from Ohio. When challenged about keeping a souvenir from the enemy, he answered simply, "It's a reminder that the enemy believed in progress more than punishment." After that, he never spoke of ideology again, only of adjustment, of tolerances, torque, and the quiet mathematics required to make 2 unequal parts function as one. For the Americans, the experience reshaped policy long after the barbed wire came down. Camp logs describing efficient, humane rehabilitation circulated as case studies in military hospitals and engineering schools. Doctors noted reduced relapse, officers noted discipline without brutality, and planners noted cost efficiency alongside dignity. When Congress later debated veterans' care funding, witnesses cited the POW programs as living proof that structured compassion worked. Rehabilitation was not charity, they argued, but maintenance of national capacity. Some of those same workshops reopened in peacetime to serve disabled civilians, men and women, no longer enemies, but simply citizens learning again how to stand, lift, and earn. Today, only a few foundations of Camp Concordia remain. Scattered concrete pads, rusted bolts, and prairie grass whispering over buried pipes. Meadowlark's nest where guard towers once cast shadows. Yet beneath that soil lingers the blueprint of a peculiar victory, not a victory of arms or banners, but of conduct over cruelty, of routine over rage, of maintenance over malice. In that Midwestern camp, men who expected humiliation discovered order instead. They learned schedules, standards, and the discipline of care. They learned that strength could be firm without being vindictive, and that defeat, when treated with structure, could begin to heal itself. Humanity's quiet triumph is not the right to conquer, but the courage to mend. sometimes between the hands that splint a stranger's wound or steady a shaking tool. The real peace begins before the war has even ended. That legacy resists monuments. It survives in manuals, training charts, and attitudes passed quietly between nurses, mechanics, and officers. It proves systems matter, mercy can be engineered, and rebuilding people is a skill. Practiced deliberately, it outlasts runes and rhetoric, still challenging fear during crises everywhere.